We would do well to slow down a little. Focus on the significant, lift up our eyes, and truly see the things that matter most. Strength comes not from frantic activity, but from being settled on a firm foundation of truth and light. It comes from paying attention to the divine things that matter most. Diligently doing the things that matter most will lead us to the Savior of the world.
Thomas C. Riley was born April 30th, 1844, in Preston, England, to John and Mary Ann Maley Riley. On July 28, 1856, Thomas and his mother began the 1,300-mile trek with the Edward Martin Handcart Company to Salt Lake Valley. They dealt with bitter cold, high winds, exposure, exhaustion, sickness, and death. They chewed on toasted rawhide just to stay alive. When the rescuers came, 2/3 of the survivors were unable to walk. Susan Ann Stoker had lived in Carthage, Illinois, and often talked about hearing the shots of the mob who murdered their beloved prophet and his brother Joseph and Hiram Smith on June 27, 1844. Thomas and Susan met in Utah and were married April 6, 1863. In 1893, they left Utah for Mormon Bend, where Thomas was granted permission by church authorities to establish a Sunday school. He was later called to be the first Sunday school superintendent of the Burlington ward until 1901. He sang in the ward choir, performed in a theatrical group, and was the drummer in the town band. Thomas and Susan's first home was a 2-room log cabin. They drank ditch water until the country got soaked up, and then you could get water in a well. After maybe 10 years, it just all went to bog and alkali showed up, they said. Dad Riley, as he was often called, operated a livery barn and kept teams and buggies for hire. The livery barn was across the street from the dance hall, and many times let someone spend the night in his office to sober up before going home. Thomas and Susan had 10 children, the youngest being Michael Clarence, born February 9, 1888. Michael married Ethel Hopkin on November 6, 1911. Ethel tells of their courtship. She said, "I was working for Aunt Kate in Burlington. She had the hotel. I'd heard about Mike Riley, and they said, 'Don't ever go with him. He's the toughest guy in Burlington.' It wasn't too long after that until he came riding up on his horse early one evening. One of Aunt Kate's boys was in the yard, and Mike said, 'Tell Ethel to come out here a minute. I want to talk to her.' So I went out. He said, 'Would you go to the dance to Otto with me tonight?' I told him no, I couldn't go. Anyway, he kept coming and bothering me to go with him, so I decided I would. He was not the wildest, roughest man in Burlington." Ethel and Michael have descendants that still reside in the Burlington area.
James S. Jorgensen was born on September 3, 1870 at Moroni, Utah to James and Christina Jorgensen. Ellen Maria Agard was born January 23, 1872 at Fountain Green, Utah to Andrew James and Annie Jensen Agard. James's father was called to be the bishop in Fountain Green, and thus their courtship began. Their fathers were in various business deals together also, so the two had time to spend with each other. Ellen went to Colorado for a short visit, and when she returned to Utah, James and Ellen were married in the Manti Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on January 17, 1894. Ellen's sister, Raina, and her husband, Albert Olson, lived in Lovell. They encouraged Jim and Ellen to move to the Bighorn Basin. On August 2, 1902, a group of men, including James, left Fountain Green and started for Lovell, trailing about 100 head of cattle. Ellen and the family soon followed. When they were young, they attended dances, community talent programs, and went sleigh riding in the winter. Andrew Agard had sleigh bells that were used. They spent evenings just singing around the piano. They loved music and were quite musical. Albert was born February 12, 1901 in Parowan, Utah to Enoch and Lily Wardell. They moved to Cali in 1901. Albert was a basketball star at the Bighorn Academy. Lenny was born October 17, 1901 in Summit, Utah to Isaac and Letty Jones, who moved to Otto in 1902. Several years later, Lenny and her sister, Elna, attended the academy in Cali. Albert said, "Tom Croft from Level and I used to take Lenny and Elna on dates. Tom went on his mission in 1921 and he and Elna became engaged. Lenny was finishing at the academy, and when school was out I moved her back to Otto. Her father persuaded me to take care of the farm while he took his sheep to Little Ball Mountain for the summer. Lenny went to summer school at Laramie. Elna took care of their mother whose health was ailing, and Delsa helped in the field. Elna helped in the field when she could, and Winnie also helped when she was through with summer school. Ross came over to help with the farm work too. Ross worked with the teams and Delsa ran the old Ford tractor. Minnie taught school in Otto that fall and Elna went back to the academy. I was called on a mission and Linny said she wanted to help me. I told her there was only one way I would consent to that, and that would be if she was my wife. We went to the Salt Lake Temple and were married for time and all eternity on January 12, 1922. We spent our short honeymoon sightseeing around Salt Lake City, then entered the mission home. When I set out for the Southern States Mission, we rode the train together to Cheyenne. After several delays and several goodbyes, we parted, with Lenny going back to Otto to teach, and me going to my mission. That was a hard thing to do. My dear wife supported me and had household goods brought for us to set up housekeeping when I returned. We lived in Rulan's little house on his farm, and she drove a horse and buggy to her school in Otto. When Ross and Delsa came out, we all lived together until we could get a house built on our place. Then we all lived there for a long time and raised our families just like we were one big family.
Ross was born May 15, 1904 in Cowley, Wyoming, to Enoch and Lily Wardell. Delsa was born July 1, 1905 to Isaac and Letty Jones. Ross Wardell and Delsa Jones were married December 18, 1921. Ross and Albert, brothers, married sisters. They raised their families together. They worked together and played together. Both families are well known for their musical talents. Delsa said this: "We would watch the crops wither and burn up year after year. We did have cows and chickens and raised a big garden for which water was allowed. We canned hundreds of quarts of corn, peas, and beans in a boiler on a coal and wood-burning stove. We sold the extra garden produce. Albert was the peddler. One time he came home with a long leather purse filled with money and dumped it on the table. How we rejoiced, laughed, and cried. Besides farming, Ross drove the school bus. Albert trapped coyotes, rode the ditch, and sold John Deere tractors. We never wanted for food to eat or clothes to cover our bodies. The children sometimes wore cardboard in the bottom of their shoes, but that was a minor thing. Many times, Lenny and I washed the little boys' overalls and shirts at night so they would be clean for school the next day. The Lord blessed us with health and strength and love beyond belief."
Once there was a princess,
Was the princess you?
and she fell in love.
Was it hard to do?
It was very easy. Anyone could see that the prince was charming. The only one for me.
Was he strong and handsome?
Was he big and tall?
There's nobody like him. Anywhere at all.
Did he say he loved you? Did he steal a kiss?
He was so romantic, I could not resist.
William Neves was born September 10, 1847 at Crossrand, Waldron, England, to William and Dinah Ashdown Neves. Dinah, William's mother, died in October of 1850. Her husband was out of the country, so the three children, Ruth, Amos, and William, age 3, were put into an orphanage. At that time, orphans were treated very cruelly. When Dinah's brother and his wife, Richard and Ann Ashdown, heard about it, they took the 3 children out of the orphanage and raised them with their 4 children. Richard was completely deaf, and it was difficult to provide for his large family. William went to work in the saw mills at a very young age. LDS missionaries came to their home, and, although Richard was unable to hear, he could read, and they were converted. When William was 13, they sailed to America on the Manchester. They arrived in May of 1861 at the time of the Civil War. The children in the company walked all the way from Florence, Nebraska to Utah. One night, William threw his bedroll over the sagebrush and went to sleep. The next morning, he rolled up his bed and discovered he had slept on top of a rattlesnake. The Ashdown Neves family settled in Bountiful, Utah. William learned the carpenter trade and helped build the LDS temples in Salt Lake and Logan. Abigail Eve Schaefer was born October 18, 1852, to John Isaac and Nancy Ann Hill Schaefer, who came across the plains in 1852 and settled in Bingham Fort, Utah, shortly before Abby was born. William Neves and Abigail Eve Schaefer were married in Logan, Utah on the September 20th, 1869. On July 18, 1894, the family left for the, quote, beautiful, wealthy, and wonderful Bighorn Basin, unquote. In the first 2 wagons were their possessions and 11 people. William, age 47, Abby, age 42, followed by Alice, Will Jr., John, Hiram, Richard, Lewis, Wilford, Lilius, and Chester, 16 months old. Their daughter Nancy and her husband Lars Nilsson were in the 3rd wagon, which was pulled by 4 horses. They moved to their homesteads in the Bighorn Basin in the spring of 1895. They built a barn and planted a large orchard. Fritz Graebert and Minnie Brum were born in Germany. The Graeberts were Bauers, which is what they called farmers who worked with horses. Fritz Graebert served 7 years in the Franco-Prussian War when Napoleon III was ruler of France and received several citations of honor. He returned to Hamburg and resumed his work as a construction company foreman. Fritz and Minnie Graebert were married March 21, 1879. Her parents were innkeepers and grew flax. Minnie learned at a young age how to spin flax into fine linen and how to card and spin wool. In March 1884, they immigrated to America with Minnie, Will, and Emma, aged 3 months. They had about $1,600 to their name. Minnie took her spinning wheel and many beautiful pieces of linen she had made herself. In 1901, the Grayberts sold their land for $1,200 in Nebraska, celebrated the July 4th in Hemingford, and left for Germania, now called Emblem, on July 7th, with Bill, age 19, Marie, 14, Alma, 12, Fred, 5, and John Bauer, Fritz's nephew, who had recently arrived from Germany. They had 2 covered wagons, 2 teams, a crippled pony, 1 brood mare with 4 colts, 6 sheep, and 100 head of cattle. Along with other household necessity were Minnie's spinning wheel and her linens. Minnie, age 21, and Emma, 17, had jobs and stayed in Nebraska. Fritz and Minnie Graybert had 10 children, with descendants currently residing in the Emblem, Burlington area.
Baby face, you got the cutest little baby face. There's nothing I want to take your place, my little baby face. My heart is different. You should have started something, baby face. I'm at the level when I'm in your crib embrace. I didn't mean to shout, 'cause I just fell in love with you, pretty baby.
James Agard was born May 23, 1885 in Levan, Utah, to Niels and Beletta Agard. James was 6 years old when his father died. He quit school at a young age to go to work herding sheep and doing farm work. He also worked on the railroad for 2 years with his uncle. The workers lived in a tent about the size of a circus tent. There was a big stove in the middle of the tent which they huddled around in cold weather. He was so shy because of his language barrier that he slept in his covered wagon. Jim slept out in the cold with his uncle. Young Jim was tall, good-looking, and fun-loving. He liked to race horses, and sometimes he and his friends caught wild burros out on the plains and tried to ride them. Christine Rasmini Winter, or Annie as they called her, was the third of 11 children, was born December 3, 1885, in Sanpete County, Utah, to Jorgen and Rasmini Winter. The family moved to Levan when Annie was 3 years old. When she was about 15, Jim Agard began to take a special interest in the petite, blonde, blue-eyed girl. One evening, Annie was milking the cow when Jim happened to ride by on his horse. He gallantly offered to do the milking for her, and before he finished, he had worked up enough courage to ask her for a date. James Agard, age 19, and Annie Winter, age 18, were married on June 1, 1904, in the LDS Temple at Manti, Utah. After Jim had to leave for a while, when he was gone, he wrote to Annie and told her about the beautiful country and dandy 3-room house he had in the Burlington area. In September 1915, with their possessions loaded on an immigrant car, Annie tearfully bade goodbye to her mother, father, brothers, and sisters, and boarded the train with her children Edgar, Orlando, Reuben, and Geneva. Uncle Andrew and his granddaughter Mary Jorgensen were also with them. It was several days before the Wary family arrived in Lovell. Jim was there with his team and wagon to take the remaining 35 miles to Burlington over rough, dusty roads. Annie's heart sank when she saw the dandy 3-room log house. One room was full of grain. She did her best to clean it up and fix it up, but when it rained, the water went straight through the sod roof. It was very discouraging. They bought sheep and the 80 acres where they lived. They planted apple trees, gooseberries, currants, and raised big gardens. Several years later, Jim built a much larger home, and they had a housewarming party. Chet Kaufman played his fiddle, and everyone had a great time dancing.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be close to you. Why do stars fall down from the sky every time you walk by? Just like me, they long to be close to you. On the day that you were born, the angels got together and decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkled moon dust in your hair and golden starlight in your eyes of blue. And I'll follow you all around, just like me. They long to be close to you, close to you.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Joyce. And we've been married 57 years.
We've been married a little bit over a year.
20 years.
25 years.
40 years.
7 years, 8 months, and 13 days.
14 days.
14 days.
An expression of love means an act of service.
It's either a phone call or email or a message on Facebook.
A smile, a hug. We're kind of a huggy family.
He always opens the door for me. He'll make dinner for us.
It just helps us to stay strong, to stay together.
That's how I express my love. Sloppy Joe, candlelight.
Something I really appreciate about him is that he's able to help me see the bigger picture. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways.
These rocks are an expression of our love.
Usually I'm reading one while kids are screaming in the background.
We want to work so hard to smooth out all of these edges.
Not just a spoonful, a ladle full of love every day.
We always have a lot of humor in our relationship.
That's it. Humor.
Yeah.
You know, we both have rough edges.
need a lot of work.
We both have rough edges.
We call it teamwork. I have this guy, me, and the Lord.
We have a lot of fun together.
We all the time saying I love you to one another.
I love her.
We promised the Lord that we would do everything we could do to achieve that goal of a celestial marriage.
I learned from my wife the importance of expressions of love. I remember one day I took some of those little round paper circles that you form when you punch holes in paper, and I wrote on them numbers 1 to 100. Turned it over and wrote her a message, one word on each circle. Then I scooped them up and put them in an envelope. I thought she'd get a good laugh. When she passed away, I found in her private things how much she appreciated the simple messages that we shared with each other. I noted that she'd carefully pasted every one of those circles on a piece of paper, as if they were a valuable treasure. I am confident that when in our future, I will see her again beyond the veil. We will recognize that we have become even more deeply in love. We will appreciate each other even more.
We want to be together forever because we love each other.
it just has to be forever. It wouldn't make sense for us to come this far and have it get this good and then not be perpetuated.
I'm glad that I'll be able to have this blessing in my life now and the life to come.
Marriage provides an ideal setting for overcoming any tendency to be selfish or self-centered. Don't withhold those natural expressions of love. Express gratitude for what your spouse does for you. Express that love and gratitude often. That will make life far richer and more pleasant and purposeful. Have faith in those promises and live to be worthy of them.
What's going on? Ding, ding. Crazy. Ding, ding. Bam, bam, ding, 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 ding. breaking.
Ding, ding.